Mark hadn't expected his mailbox to become the battleground of a neighborhood feud. It was just a mailbox. Plain, practical, and nothing special. But when he stepped out onto his front lawn that chilly Saturday morning, what he saw made his stomach tighten. Shards of splintered wood lay scattered across the driveway, like the remains of a small war zone. His brand new mailbox, the one he'd carefully picked out last week, after the old one finally gave up, was smashed to pieces. The post was snapped in half, and the box itself was crushed beyond recognition. At first, Mark thought it was an accident. Maybe a driver had clipped the corner of the road, or a careless delivery truck had brushed past. But as he knelt down to inspect the damage, something about the way the wood was shattered didn't sit right with him. The breaks were jagged and forceful, deliberate. Someone had attacked it with purpose. He glanced up and down the quiet street, hoping to spot a neighbor or a passerby who might have seen something, but the road was eerily empty. The usual morning bustle was absent. Only the distant hum of a lawnmower echoed faintly from a few houses down. Mark's mind raced through the possibilities. Who would want to damage his mailbox? He wasn't exactly new to the neighborhood, but he kept mostly to himself. Sure, a few of the HOA members had given him cold shoulders since he challenged some community rules, but none seemed malicious enough to sabotage his property. His phone buzzed suddenly in his pocket, breaking the heavy silence. He pulled it out, half expecting a prank call or spam. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. "This is just the beginning. Watch your back." A cold shiver ran down Mark's spine. Was this connected to the mailbox? Was someone trying to intimidate him? His pulse quickened as he looked around again, this time more carefully. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement. A fleeting shadow darting behind a large oak tree across the street. When he turned to look, the figure was gone. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just an empty sidewalk. "Who's there?" Mark called out, his voice firmer than he felt. Only silence answered. His heart thudded loudly, echoing in his ears as the unease settled deep inside him. Whoever had done this wasn't just careless. They wanted him to know they were watching. Mark pulled his coat tighter around him and snapped a photo of the wreckage. If this was a game to someone, he was determined not to be the loser. He locked the front door and decided to talk to his neighbor, Mr. Jensen, a retired police officer who lived 2 doors down. Maybe he could offer some advice, or keep an eye out. Mr. Jensen listened carefully and nodded, his weathered face grave. "You did the right thing by documenting it," he said. "But be careful. This kind of behavior can escalate quickly if it's personal." Mark swallowed hard. Personal? That word echoed ominously in his mind. Was this about the HOA disputes? Or something else? As Mark walked back to his house, he noticed something strange near the mailbox ruins. A small jagged piece of metal. It looked like a shard from a crowbar, or some kind of tool, left behind by mistake. He pocketed it, thinking it might be useful evidence later. That night, sleep was elusive. Every creak, every whisper of wind outside his window jolted him awake. His mailbox was gone, but the warning had arrived loud and clear. Someone was out there, watching, waiting, and Mark had no idea what would come next. Mark barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shattered remains of his mailbox and replayed the chilling text message in his mind. "This is just the beginning. Watch your back." It felt like a threat, a promise of more to come. The next morning, Mark set to work replacing the mailbox. He chose a sturdier one this time, a sleek metal box mounted on a reinforced post. It wasn't indestructible, but it would have to do for now. He hoped that whoever was behind the attacks would get the message. He wasn't backing down. For a few days, everything seemed calm. The neighborhood's usual rhythm returned, and Mark tried to focus on his day-to-day life, but the uneasy feeling never left him. He couldn't shake the sense that eyes were watching from just out of sight. Then, just before midnight on a Thursday, it happened again. Mark was jolted awake by the loud crash of splintering wood outside his bedroom window. His heart hammered as he scrambled for his phone, turning on the flashlight app as he peeked through the curtains. The new mailbox, the one he'd just installed, lay in ruins. The metal box was dented and twisted, and the post had been ripped from the ground, leaving a jagged stump behind. It was worse than before. Mark's pulse pounded as he dialed 911. The dispatcher assured him an officer would be sent immediately, but the street was quiet by the time the patrol car arrived. No one was there, no footprints, no tire tracks. Mark's neighbor, Mr. Jensen, came outside in his pajamas, flashlight in hand. "Looks like whoever did this isn't afraid of consequences," he said grimly. "We need to catch them before this escalates." Mark nodded, his jaw clenched. But how? There's no sign, no clue. It's like they vanish into thin air. That night, Mark sat in his dark living room, watching the street with binoculars and waiting. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional passing car. Just when he was about to give up, something caught his eye. A figure moved silently down the sidewalk toward his house. Mark squinted, heart pounding. It was a woman, tall with a confident stride. She wore a long coat and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. Mark's breath caught as the figure stopped beside the destroyed mailbox, crouched down, and then raised an object in the air. Something heavy, like a bat or a crowbar. His hands shook as he aimed his phone's camera, snapping a photo just before the figure suddenly looked up. Their eyes met for a brief second. It was Karen. The next morning, Mark showed the photo to Mr. Jensen and a few neighbors during the weekly HOA meeting. The room buzzed with whispers and raised eyebrows. Karen was known for her strict enforcement of neighborhood rules. Some called her the HOA Queen. But no one imagined she would resort to vandalism. Karen sat across the room, her expression unreadable. When Mark approached her later to ask about the photo, she gave a cold smile. "You've got it all wrong," she said smoothly. "I was just inspecting the mailbox, making sure it met community standards." Her explanation felt hollow, and Mark's gut told him she was hiding something. But Karen had allies, and challenging her in front of the HOA was risky. Still, Mark couldn't ignore the growing tension. It was clear this wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. That evening, Mark returned home to find a small package left on his porch. Inside was a broken piece of the old mailbox, wrapped in newspaper with a handwritten note. "Stop digging. This will end badly." Mark's hands trembled as he read the warning. Someone wanted him to back off, to stay silent. But instead of fear, a stubborn resolve took root. He wasn't going to let Karen, or anyone else, intimidate him. Mark's suspicion of Karen gnawed at him like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. The photograph from the previous night played on a loop in his mind. Her steely eyes, catching his for a heartbeat too long. But he knew better than to jump to conclusions without proof. Yet every instinct screamed that Karen was the key to this mystery. Determined to find the truth, Mark decided to keep a closer watch on Karen's movements. He started arriving home earlier, lingering by his window with binoculars. His neighbors noticed the change in his demeanor. Mark, usually reserved, was suddenly more alert, more restless. One evening, just as dusk settled over the quiet street, Mark spotted Karen emerging from her house. She moved deliberately, clutching a large, black bag that swung by her side. She glanced around suspiciously before heading toward the community mailbox cluster a few houses down. Mark's curiosity flared. Why was Karen so secretive? Was the bag full of tools, or something worse? He couldn't let her slip away unnoticed. Quiet as a cat, Mark followed at a distance. Karen stopped near the cluster and knelt down, pulling out what looked like a crowbar. For a moment, she seemed to be inspecting something, or someone, but there was no one else in sight. Suddenly, Karen's head snapped up. Mark froze, heart racing. Was she about to discover him trailing her? But she shrugged and continued her task, twisting and bending the metal mailbox post with ease. Mark felt a surge of anger mixed with dread. Was she vandalizing mailboxes? Or was there another explanation? And why target him so aggressively? Later that night, Mark's phone buzzed with an anonymous message. Curiosity killed the cat. Stop. Spying, or you'll regret it. The sender was untraceable, but the tone was unmistakably hostile. Mark's thoughts raced. Whoever was behind the mailbox attacks wanted him scared, but he refused to be silenced. He decided it was time to confront Karen, but not without backup. He invited Mr. Jensen and a few trusted neighbors to a discreet meeting. They agreed to keep watch and document any suspicious activity. The next day, Mark approached Karen casually in the grocery store parking lot, trying to mask his nervousness. "Karen," he said, forcing a calm tone, "we need to talk about the mailboxes. I have concerns about what's been happening." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I don't appreciate accusations," she said coldly. "If you have evidence, bring it to the HOA meeting. Otherwise, keep your distance." Before Mark could respond, she turned sharply and walked away, leaving a chill in the air. The encounter confirmed what he already suspected. Karen was hiding something, and she was not going to give up without a fight. That evening, Mark reviewed the footage from a small security camera he'd installed near his mailbox. His hands trembled as the video played. There, clear as day, was Karen approaching his mailbox late at night. She bent down and struck it hard with an object before retreating into the shadows. But then, a second figure appeared. A hooded person moving quickly away from the scene. Mark's breath caught. Who was the accomplice? With this new evidence, Mark felt both vindicated and more vulnerable than ever. The problem was bigger than just one neighbor's grudge. It was a silent war in their seemingly peaceful community. Determined to protect his home and uncover the truth, Mark began researching ways to build a mailbox that no one could break. But as he planned, he couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes watching him weren't just Karen's anymore. The mystery deepened and the stakes grew higher. The atmosphere in the neighborhood had shifted, growing colder and heavier, like a thick fog settling over the streets. Mark felt it in every step he took toward Karen's house that afternoon, a mix of dread and determination fueling his pace. The broken mailbox and the cryptic threats had pushed him to a breaking point. He needed answers. Karen's front door was slightly ajar when Mark reached it. He hesitated, then knocked firmly. A moment later, she appeared, impeccably dressed, her face a mask of calm indifference. "Mark," she said smoothly. "What a surprise." He took a breath, steeling himself. "Karen, I have proof now. I saw you on my security footage, smashing my mailbox. Why are you doing this?" Her eyes flickered, a brief crack in her composed facade, before she smiled, cold and tight. "You're mistaken. I was there for a completely different reason." "Different reason?" Mark echoed. "You smashed my mailbox. Twice. You even left a note wanting me to stop." Karen's smile faded. replaced by a hard glint in her eyes. Sometimes, people need a lesson in boundaries. Your mailbox didn't meet HOA guidelines. I was trying to protect the community's standards. Mark's jaw tightened. There are better ways to handle that. Destroying someone's property isn't one of them. Karen leaned in, lowering her voice to a threatening whisper. You don't understand, Mark. This is bigger than a mailbox. You're poking at things you don't belong to. Stop now, or you'll regret it. Before Mark could respond, she shut the door abruptly. His fist bumped against the solid wood, frustration and fear rising inside him like a storm. As he walked back to his house, Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced down. A new message from an unknown number. One last warning. Drop it before it's too late. His hands shook. But the fire inside refused to die out. Someone wanted him silenced. But Mark wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. That night, Mark installed extra security lights and cameras around his property. He called Mr. Jensen and a few neighbors, urging them to stay vigilant. The sense of paranoia was thick, but he needed allies. Days passed, and the neighborhood held its breath. No new attacks, but Mark knew better than to trust the calm. Then, one evening, Mark found his toolbox shattered in the driveway, tools strewn across the grass. Among the mess lay a note scribbled hastily. This isn't a game. Stop before you lose more than a mailbox. Fear twisted in Mark's gut, but also a strange resolve. Whoever was behind this wanted a war, and he was ready to fight. The following morning, Mark met quietly with Mr. Jensen and two neighbors. They planned to take shifts watching the street at night, hoping to catch the vandal in the act. That very night, Mark waited by his window, heart pounding. Hours crawled by in silence. Just as his eyelids began to droop, a shadow appeared. The figure moved cautiously, stepping toward the mailbox. Mark grabbed his phone, flashlight on, ready to catch the culprit. The intruder bent down, but this time, Mark's voice cut through the darkness like a whip. Stop! I'm calling the police! The figure froze, then bolted into the night, vanishing. Before the patrol car arrived, the next day, Mark discovered footprints near the mailbox. Not Karen's, but smaller, lighter. Someone else was involved. Mark's suspicion grew. Karen might be the face, but the real threat lurked deeper in the shadows. The chilling confrontation had only opened a door. Beyond it waited something more dangerous. And Mark was standing right in the middle. The early morning sun barely pierced the overcast sky as Mark sipped his coffee, staring at the wreckage of his toolbox scattered across the driveway. His mind churned with frustration and determination. Whoever was behind this wasn't just playing a childish game. They were trying to intimidate him, to break his spirit, but Mark was far from defeated. As he cleaned up the mess, Mark's thoughts turned to his next move. The repeated attacks on his mailbox weren't just random vandalism. They were targeted, calculated. Whoever was doing this wanted to send a message, and Mark had decided he was going to send one right back. That afternoon, Mark dove into research, scouring the internet for ideas on how to make a mailbox unbreakable. There were stories of mailboxes armored with steel plates, posts sunk deep into concrete foundations, even designs incorporating surveillance and alarm systems. The more he read, the clearer his plan became. He would build a mailbox that was not just sturdy, but indestructible, something that would stand as a symbol of resilience and a direct challenge to whoever dared to destroy it again. But Mark also knew this wouldn't be easy. The materials would be expensive, the construction demanding, and there was no guarantee it would stop the attacks completely. Still, the risk was worth it. Over the next few days, Mark gathered supplies: steel beams, reinforced concrete, heavy-duty locks, and even a motion-activated camera system to catch anyone who came near. He called a local handyman he trusted to help with the construction. As they worked together in Mark's driveway, Mark's thoughts kept drifting back to Karen. She had denied involvement, but her hostility and presence around the mailbox were impossible to ignore. Yet the mysterious smaller footprints suggested someone else was lurking in the background, perhaps a partner, or someone with their own vendetta. Mark shared his concerns with Mr. Jensen during one of their nightly meetings. The retired cop nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like a turf war," Jensen said grimly. "If Karen's involved, she might have help. Be careful who you trust." The tension in the neighborhood had reached a boiling point. Rumors spread like wildfire, dividing neighbors into camps. Some believed Mark, others defended Karen. The HOA meetings turned hostile, and Mark found himself isolated in more ways than one. One evening, as Mark finished setting the last bolts on the new mailbox frame, his phone buzzed again with an anonymous text. "You're digging too deep. Back off, or there will be consequences." Mark stared at the message, his jaw tightening. They were watching every move, waiting for him to make a mistake. But he had already made his decision. The next night, Mark installed the motion-activated cameras and sensors, positioning them carefully to cover every angle. The new mailbox stood tall and unyielding, a fortress in a sea of uncertainty. As he stepped back to admire the work, a strange mix of pride and apprehension washed over him. This mailbox was more than a piece of metal and concrete. It was a declaration, and the battle for the neighborhood was far from over. Mark knew that soon, whoever was behind the attacks would try again. The question was, would they be ready to face the consequences? The morning sun glinted off the freshly poured concrete around Mark's mailbox post, now solidly anchored deep into the earth. The steel frame gleamed under the faint light, reinforced, panels wrapped tightly around the box itself, like armor. It looked more like a fortress than a mailbox, an unyielding statement to whoever had been terrorizing his property. Mark stepped back to admire his handiwork. With the cameras and motion sensors blinking quietly, the new mailbox wasn't just indestructible. It was practically a security system on its own. He felt a surge of satisfaction, mixed with nervous anticipation. This was his way of saying, "You can try, but you won't win." That night, Mark sat by his window, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across the room. He was watching the live feed from the cameras, ready to catch any movement around the mailbox. Hours passed. The neighborhood was silent. Then, just past midnight, the camera's infrared lights caught something, a shadow moving cautiously across the yard. Mark's heart raced. The figure stopped just in front of the new mailbox and reached out. But, instead of smashing it, the intruder paused, seemingly confused by the steel walls and the cameras. Suddenly, a faint light flickered from the mailbox's side. Mark realized the cameras had started recording. The figure stepped back, pulling up their hood. Mark's breath caught. It wasn't Karen. It was someone smaller, more nimble, moving with the quiet precision of someone used to staying unseen. Mark watched, frozen, as the figure circled the mailbox, pulling out a small device, something that looked like a jammer or signal disruptor. The device blinked with red lights, and the cameras momentarily went dark. Panic surged in Mark's chest. Whoever this was had come prepared. Then in the darkness, Mark's phone buzzed. A new message appeared. "You think your little fortress can stop us? Think again." Mark's fingers trembled as he typed back. "Who are you? What do you want?" No reply. The figure moved quickly, slipping away into the shadows before Mark could react. For hours afterward, Mark sat wide awake, replaying the footage. The mystery deepened. If it wasn't Karen, who was behind this new level of sabotage? And why were they escalating the attacks? The next morning, Mark shared the video with Mr. Jensen and a trusted neighbor, Lisa, who worked in IT security. Lisa's eyes narrowed as she analyzed the footage. "This isn't just vandalism anymore," she said. "They're using tech to disable your defenses. Whoever this is, they know what they're doing." Mark felt the weight of those words settle over him like a storm cloud. The battle had shifted from physical destruction to something far more dangerous: technology and stealth. Days later, the HOA meeting was tense, the air thick with suspicion. Karen sat silently, watching Mark closely. No one mentioned the video, but the unspoken tension was palpable. Mark knew he had to stay one step ahead. The indestructible mailbox was his first line of defense. But the real war was just beginning, and somewhere in the shadows, the attacker was watching, waiting for the next move. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the neighborhood was no longer just a place to live. It had become a battleground. The attacks on his mailbox had evolved from crude vandalism to calculated sabotage. Whoever was behind this wasn't just angry. They were skilled, patient, and dangerous. Days passed with no further incidents, but Mark knew better than to trust the silence. Every night he pored over the security footage, searching for any sign of the mysterious intruder, but the jammer had erased the last encounter, leaving him with nothing but frustration and unanswered questions. Lisa, the IT expert, worked tirelessly alongside Mark to upgrade the security system. They installed backup cameras with encrypted signals and a network of sensors linked to Mark's phone. Every movement around his property would now trigger an alert. Still, the tension weighed heavily on Mark's mind. One evening, while reviewing footage from the previous week, Lisa stopped suddenly. "Mark, look at this," she said, pointing to a blurry figure lurking near Karen's house. The figure was masked, but the gait and stance were familiar. "Could that be her?" Mark asked. Lisa shook her head. "No, it's someone else. Someone trying to stay hidden." Mark's heart raced. The realization hit him like a punch. Karen might not be the sole culprit. Someone else was involved, maybe even orchestrating the attacks. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was distorted, mechanical, but unmistakably familiar. "Stop digging, Mark," the voice warned. "This isn't just about mailboxes anymore. Walk away or face the consequences." Mark's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this? Why are you doing this?" Silence. Then the line went dead. The call confirmed Mark's worst fear. He was tangled in something bigger than a neighborhood spat. But what? That night, Mark sat outside with Mr. Jensen and Lisa, strategizing. "We need to expose whoever's behind this," Mr. Jensen said. "But we have to be smart. They're watching." Lisa nodded. "I can trace the call's origin and track any hacking attempts. But we have to bait them, to make them make a mistake." Mark's mind whirred. He decided to stage a trap. A fake mailbox, rigged with extra sensors and cameras, placed in a more visible spot. The idea was to lure the culprit into revealing themselves. For the next few days, Mark watched the fake mailbox closely. Neighbors began to notice his increased vigilance, some offering support, others whispering doubts. Then, late one night, the trap sprang. The security system triggered an alert: movement at the fake mailbox. Mark grabbed his phone and raced outside, flashlight cutting through the darkness. A figure crouched beside the mailbox, working quickly. The streetlight cast shadows on a hoodie and a mask. "Freeze!" Mark shouted. The figure startled, dropping a small device, and darting away into the night, Mark chased, heart pounding, but the figure disappeared into the maze of streets. When he returned to the mailbox, he found the dropped device, a miniature jammer, similar to the one used before. Back inside, Mark examined the device with Lisa. It was high-tech, sophisticated. Someone with resources was involved. As dawn broke, Mark realized the war was far from over. The enemy was invisible, elusive, and closing in. But Mark wasn't done yet. The morning after the failed break-in, Mark felt the weight of exhaustion settled deep in his bones. Sleepless nights and constant vigilance had taken their toll, but he refused to surrender. The mailbox war had turned into a battle for peace, and Mark was determined to win. With the miniature jammer in hand, Mark and Lisa worked tirelessly to trace its origin. Days of digging through signal logs and triangulating frequencies finally paid off. The source of the device was a location just a few blocks away. Mark's heart pounded. He wasn't prepared for what he found when he followed the lead. It was Karen's house. He stood across the street, staring at the familiar porch, where so many confrontations had taken place. The calm facade of her home suddenly felt like a mask, hiding secrets far darker than a neighborhood feud. Mark hesitated, then knocked firmly on Karen's door. When she opened, the cold mask was replaced by a flicker of surprise. "Mark," she said cautiously, "what are you doing here?" Without hesitation, Mark held up the jammer. "I traced this back to your house. Care to explain?" Karen's eyes darted briefly toward the living room, before she sighed, stepping aside to let him in. Inside, the tension was thick. Karen admitted the truth in a quiet, steady voice. "I didn't act alone," she confessed. "There's someone else. Someone who wanted to keep control over the neighborhood, no matter what it took." Mark's mind raced. "Who?" Karen hesitated, then spoke the name that made Mark's blood run cold. "It's David, our HOA president." David, a man known for his charm and strict leadership, had been quietly orchestrating the attacks to intimidate residents into compliance. The mailbox destruction was a smokescreen for a deeper agenda, controlling the community through fear. Karen revealed that she had initially resisted, but was coerced into participating. The notes, the threats, they were all part of David's plan to isolate Mark and silence dissenters. Mark felt a mix of shock and betrayal. The man trusted to uphold the neighborhood's best interests was the real enemy. Armed with this knowledge, Mark, Karen, Lisa, and Mr. Jensen devised a plan to expose David. They gathered evidence, video footage, intercepted messages, witness statements, and prepared for the next HOA meeting. When the meeting day arrived, tension crackled in the air. David sat confidently at the head of the table, unaware his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. Mark presented the evidence, piece by piece. The room fell silent as the truth emerged. David's manipulation, intimidation tactics, and attempts to suppress opposition. David's face darkened, but the crowd's murmurs grew louder in outrage. The community's trust shattered. In the end, David was removed from his position, and an election was called for new leadership. Karen, repentant and seeking redemption, volunteered to help rebuild trust. Mark's mailbox remained unscathed, a symbol of his perseverance and courage. As peace returned to the neighborhood, Mark looked back on the ordeal with mixed feelings. He had faced threats, betrayal, and fear, but also found allies and strength. The mailbox battle was over, but the lessons lingered. Vigilance, community, and standing up for what's right, even when the enemy is closer than you think.